So welcome to a new series, Jewish art or idolatry. We're going to go through some of the most famous images in Jewish history and Jewish art, and we're going to track their history and what their significance is. So tonight we're going to begin by talking about the Israeli flag. So hopefully everybody here is familiar with the Israeli flag. Everybody's been seeing a lot of it recently, I hope, with thanks to last week being Yom Ha'atzmaut, Israeli Independence Day. So now let's jump on in and let's see what we have to look at. Here we go. So here's some of the questions that I'm hoping to cover. If you have other questions, feel free to ask them. These are just the main points. Again, if you have any other questions relating to Israel's history or the Israeli flag, shoot them my way, and if I can answer them, I will. And if not, I'll try and point you somewhere where that will give you the answer. So the first question people probably have is, who invented the Israeli flag? How old is it? And why did that become the national symbol of Israel? Some other questions we're going to hopefully cover is, why is the Israeli flag blue and white? Why are there stripes across the top and bottom? And what does the Jewish star Magen David represent? Are there any other questions that are burning everybody's heads right now that they want to, ask now, so we'll know that it gets covered or not, or you just want to add it as we go along? Okay, so I guess we'll hold off on that, and just whenever has any questions at any point, feel free to ask, because the point of this is for it to be interactive, so that way hopefully everybody can get more out of the presentation. Okay, before we continue on with a lot of the technical information, just want to point out that a lot of the basis for tonight's presentation is based on a paper put out by Professor Jonathan Sarn of Brandeis University, where he spoke about American Jews and the flag of Israel. So, as the hint may be seen from the title of the paper that I'm quoting, there's going to be quite a bit of America involved in the creation of the Israeli flag. So, does anybody have any guesses as to who may have invented the Israeli flag? What have everybody heard of so far? Like, when was it invented and by whom? Any guesses? How old? What do we think?
In 1948.
1948.
Early 1900s.
Early 1900s.
Somewhere between 1948 and the early 1900s.
Okay. So we're close. So the actual pegged year is actually, which we'll get to, right? But for now, let's do a little bit of history. So the first proposed flag by somebody who you probably have heard of would be the flag proposed by Theodor Herzl. Okay, so Theodor Herzl famously wrote Der Judenstaat after having seen some trials against Jews in Europe, and for more on that, that's a share for other time. But so now here's part of what he wrote in Der Judenstaat. We tried to put forth his thesis about what needs to be as part of a Jewish state. So here's what Herzl's writing in 1896. Would anybody care to read it? I'm sorry for not being the original German, but I don't speak German, so this is what we got.
We have no flag and we need one. If we desire to lead many men, we must raise a symbol above their heads. I would suggest a white flag with 7 golden stars. The white field symbolizes our pure new life, and the stars are the 7 golden hours of our working day, for we shall march into the promised land carrying the badge of honor.
Okay. So now, as far as what flag did that look like, so don't worry, we know exactly which flag that looked like. How do I say we know exactly which flag? Because, well, we have his diaries. So if you're wondering what the flag that he wanted, this is what it looked like. So this was the original one that he thought of. But in the end, he decided to go a little fancier. And the second version is this one, right? This is one that actually ended up being used at the third
Zionist conference.
Zionist conference. Sorry, just blanked on the name of the conference. Right, at the third Zionist conference in 1903, I believe. So this one's actually one that they ended up using. Right. Oh, it's the. Okay, so now what problem might come from using Herzl's flag that you see right now when you're looking at it? What problem might there be with this flag? Anybody
Lost it.
Where
is it?
Here, sorry. Sorry for removing it. Right. So as far as it looks similar to what we eventually end up having.
The yellow star in Nazi Germany.
Right. So right. This does look similar to what eventually the Nazis the unfortunate refurbishment of the Magen David. Right. So it has Magen David, but as far as the reasoning behind using it, it doesn't seem to have any.
In his text, there's nothing Jewish in his text.
Correct. There's nothing Jewish whatsoever in his text. It seems entirely incidental. The fact that it happens to be a Jewish star. Pure coincidence, especially in the previous, true, it's a 6-pointed star, but it's not entirely, he doesn't mention that anywhere in his reasoning. So as far as who picked up on this, the answer is that this was picked up on by none other than David Wolfson, also who was the second leader of the Zionist movement, and ends up taking over after when Herzl passes away at a young age. So here's what Wolfson had to say in his diary. We'll debate whether this is historically true or not, but we'll get to that in just a second. So here's what his thoughts were. So prior to this, he mentions that he was afraid of the popularity of the flag belonging to Herzl because it was so secular. And those are 7 hours of our work day. So another way, so it's also right means that there's 7 on one of the other on the bottom of one of the other remember there was 2, we saw 2 of Herzl's designs. So one of those designs actually says that it was for the 7 days of the work week, which, as you could tell, would have upset basically every single religious Jew, because this implies that you're actually working all 7 days a week, which would not have gone over very well. So here was David Wolfson's alternate option. What does he say? This is in his own journals that were published shortly after that, I believe in the mid 1930s. So what flag would we hang in the Congress Hall? Then an idea struck me. We have a flag and it is blue and white. The talith prayer shawl with which we wrap ourselves when we pray, that is our symbol. Let us take this talith from its bag and roll it before the eyes of Israel and the eyes of all nations. So I ordered a blue and white flag with the shield of David painted upon it. That is how the national flag that flew over Congress Hall came into being. So this all sounds really nice. This is like that David Wolfson didn't like the idea of Herzl, thought it wasn't, meaningful enough, turned to the talith, and then smacked a shield of David on it, and then there's the story, and then that's how we got to where we are. So actually, if you would read Wikipedia, that's actually what they say. Well, the problem is that there is an article written by mentioned Professor Jonathan Sarna. So he had an article he wrote a couple of years ago, which is there. I'm going to post the link to the chat, to the meeting in the chat, because one of these sources I've included the link in the links to the original the sources there. So he's again a professor of history, particularly American Jewish history. So he also is from Boston. So he has quite a lot to say about the history of Jews in Boston. And what he wanted to point out is actually that that the flag is even older than what is listed here. So now here we have something called the Flag of Judah. This was designed by Rabbi Jacob J. Asquith, and painted by his son, Charles. So everybody sees the flag on the right here before I read more of the text. Everybody sees that? So now what would everybody think based on that? What does it appear to be?
Maccabee.
Right, it says Maccabee, but does this flag look like the Israeli flag? What would we say?
Very much so.
Very much so.
Yes.
And what year was it designed in?
91.
1891. How many years before the supposed second Congress that Wilson claims when he invented the flag? How many years earlier is it? So right, so this is 6-7 years earlier. And as far as the significance of the BAYT, that it was displayed at the BAYT Zion Educational Society in Boston, Massachusetts. So personally, I'd never heard of it until I read the article. But apparently, it was quite well known in the design circles back then. And in fact, the composer of Hatikva, Natzli Hertz Imber, apparently would frequent the hall around then. I'm like, I didn't even know that he was ever in America, to be perfectly honest with you, but I guess he was. So, right, so this BAYT Zion hall was like, if you were a Zionist, you knew about it. So, which tends to bring the reason of maybe this was the source. That actually, Jacob Asquith, right, with this flag seen there, that's probably what it's all based off of. The question is, how exactly did he end up getting from Boston to Basel is a separate question. How it got to the second Zionist Congress and who brought it there, but definitely there's a predecessor in 1891 in Boston. It looks very similar. In fact,
I came in late. I came in late. Did you talk about the Jewish origins of the Star of David, the Shield of David?
We're getting there. First, we're going to talk about the origins of the flag itself. We're going to get to the origins of the symbolism behind it. Just first, we're going with the basic.
Okay.
Right. First, we're going with the history of the flag. Then we're going to go to the history of the imagery behind it. As we saw, it looked like there was different reasons for the ways you end up getting to the same flag. So that's why I just want to clarify who made it, right? Rabbi Jacob Asquith, right? It's from right. So rabbi from who was his ordination in Europe and originally from the city of Kovna. So so that's Rabbi J. Asquith, right? Educated in Europe, and he decided to design this flag. Okay, so as far as how it got there, there's some say it was Isaac Harris, some say it was this guy named Morris Harris, two different guys named Harris who lived in Boston, who were both at the Zionist Congress. The only slight problem with that is that neither of them make mention of it prior. They only mention it later, so it's unclear. But as far as Professor Sarna thinks the most likely scenario, again, this is what Sophie Britannic had to say, but he thinks that the most likely scenario isn't that any one person brought it. It's just that this idea was floating around Zionist circles around that time period, and then some of them had already seen that flag, and then they kept thinking about it and made it their own version of it, which then became the what we know as the Zionist flag. So here's the second version that was seen at BAYT Zion, which they flew for even longer, which was their flag of Judah this time, with clearly indicating what it was used for, right? BAYT Zion, Educational Society, and notice they replaced Zion in the middle instead of the Maccabee for words. But again, clearly very. If you're thinking would you say this is the Israeli flag or not? The answer is yes. This looks exactly like what we now call the Israeli flag. So now that we know a little bit about who invented it, right, and why they invented it. So note here is that Rabbi Asquith gave a reason for why he chose each symbol. right? So the blue and white stripes, he says, based on the prayer shali talit, and then in the middle he placed the 6-pointed Star of David, and as far as the Maccabee in the middle is hailing back to the Maccabees, the last time Jews had sovereignty in the land of Israel. But we're going to stick with only the elements that actually made it into the final flag. So we're not going to discuss the history of the Maccabees and and how that worked out. Was it a positive? Like, you could argue, like, yeah, we'll leave aside that, and we'll focus more on what we're aiming for, which is the actual final Israeli flag. So we're going to start with the first thing mentioned, the talit. And why does it have blue stripes? Oh, sorry. One more comment is the question is, so one question is, why is the talit blue stripes? The other question is, why do we like blue and white in general? So one is, again, because of the talit, but another option, which is, as you may have heard, that the Zionist movement in its origins wasn't necessarily the most religious. So again, this is an Austrian Jewish poet named Ludwig August Frankl said, talking about what are Jewish colors? White is the radiance of the priesthood, and blue the splendors of the firmament. So it became well known that blue and white were Jewish colors. So the question is, well, how did we get to that? So you see here, white is from the vestments of the Kohanim, of the priests in the temple. And then blue splendors of the firmament, we'll have to get back to that one because as to what that means. So, but again, so the blue and white, as was mentioned both by Wolfson and by Rabbi Asquith, is definitely referring to the blue and white on the tzitzit. But the question is, why are there blue stripes on a tzitzit, on the talit to begin with?
The blue makes us think of the sky, and the sky makes us think of God.
Right, very good. Right, so that's the reasoning behind the blue, right? So that's why we use the color blue. But why do we have blue stripes? Because it's not mentioned anywhere in the text of the Torah or anywhere else that you have to have these stripes. Why did Jews start having stripes on their talises? What was the inspiration for that? So the inspiration for that is the fact is here. So here's one of the sources of somebody quoting this the origin of the minhag. This is the Pri Megadim, Rabbi Yosef ben Meir Chiomim, right, in the 18th century in Poland. So he says that, why do we have blue stripes? Because of the tchelet that we have lost, and therefore we tend to have that on our all right. So we tend to have that both on our again, the talit gadol, the large prayer shawl that people wear during Thursdays, as well as on the small talit katan, which you wear underneath our clothing, both of which, because we don't know what tchelet is, so people ended up developing the custom of wearing these blue stripes instead to remind us of that. So, okay, so then the question remains, why? So then, if the purpose of the stripes is to remind us of the tchelet, so the question is, what does tchelet and tzitzis remind us of? If these are so central, right? So now we can see why the talit and the stripes look like the flag did. But yeah, but why? Oh wait, why do we wear tzitzit? And why is the color of tchelet part of it? So Mark did get the answer right, but first let's take a little step back first.
Wait, I have a question.
Yes.
With regards to the tzitzit, the Ashkenazim do not typically have blue on their talit. They typically have black. The Sephardim have blue. And the second question is, how could Israel arrive at the shade of blue? Why not robin blue?
So that's a good question, which is the shade of blue. That's unfortunately, that's beyond the scope of our discussion. What exact color was tchelet and which color you would use? So at the end of the day, the range of shades of blue range anywhere from a bluish red all the way to a bluish green. Right, whereas as far as was why it ended up being blue in the end, the answer is, well, because we'll see why we wanted to be blue based on the sources, and again for why it's blue versus black. It's a good question based on the dyeing methods at the time, but as far as everybody agrees that the reasoning whether the stripes are blue or they're black is to correspond to the tchelet, and part of the issue why they use black is simply because there's a giant argument over what color tchelet should be, which again is a separate discussion, not for tonight. That again, if you're interested, I gave a share in it recently, so I'll just email me and I'll send you the link. Also, by the way, if anybody wants to be added to an email list to get updates about the next time we'll be continuing the series, please feel free to put your name in the chat and then message to me, and then I'll add you to the email list. So now, why would one wear tzitzis and tchelet, right? Why? So to this, we're going to turn to the last section of the Shema, which we say every morning, every evening. So let's read through the English so we know what we're saying, and let's see if we can figure out if there's a reason why we wear tzitzis. Okay, so who would like to read for us the passage of tzitzit in English, please? Because Hebrew, I'm sure we're all familiar with, but sometimes it's always good to read the Hebrew to make the English to the Hebrew so we know what we're talking about. So, any volunteers? Okay. All right. Okay. So I'll read it then. So speak to the Israelite people and instruct them to make for themselves tzitzit, fringes on the corners of their garments throughout the ages. Let them attach a cord of blue tchelet to the fringe at each corner. Let that be your fringe. Look at it and recall all the commandments of the Lord and observe them, so that you do not follow your heart and eyes and your lustful urge. Thus you shall be reminded to observe all my commandments and to be holy to your God. Okay, so why do we wear tzitzit on our four-cornered garments? What's the reason?
Because God told us to.
Well, the Father told us to, but what's the purpose of it? The verse seems to indicate.
To remind us.
Right, to remind us, right?
Mindfulness.
Very good, Mark, right? To remind us of the mitzvot and God above. Right, that's simply what it is, fairly straightforward. And then the question then comes in, well, wait, if that's the case, right, so if that's the case, then do we even need, does it even need to be blue? What does the blue add to? What does the tchelet add? So the answer to that, which Mark quoted earlier, okay, can be found here in the Gemara and the Talmud Menachot, where we discuss about the colors. So Mark, would you like to read the passage in Menachot?
It is taught in a Braita that Rabbi Meir would say, what is different about tchelet from all other types of colors, such that it was chosen for the mitzvah of ritual fringes? It is because tchelet is similar in its color to the sea, and the sea is similar to the sky, and the sky is similar to the throne of glory.
Okay. Right, so why is tchelet such a special color? Because of what it eventually reminds you of. Right, tchelet is the color that will remind us of God the best, and that's why we use the color, the color of tchelet, which we're going to just call blue for the rest of the presentation for the sake of simplicity. Right, so the purpose of this color is like the sea, which is like the sky, which is like the throne of glory, which reminds us of God above. So now we have a very good reason why the color blue and why that made it into the eventual flag of Israel. Makes perfect sense. So now that's one part of the flag that we now understand. But what about the Magen David? So for what it represents, so here is a quotation I have from Rav Moshe Feinstein, one of the leading halakhic decisors in the United States. It was written, in the mid 20th century. Somebody asked him, "Are you allowed to have a Jewish star placed in the synagogue?" Okay, no, there's a question about the Jewish star specifically. There's a separate question about whether or not you're allowed to have an Israeli flag in the synagogue or not, which we will leave for another time, or if we have time at the end, ask me and I'll get back to it. Okay, so this may sound familiar to many. So as is known for hundreds of years, Jews have placed the shape of the Magen David, the Jewish star, on the curtain of the Aron and on other various tapestries throughout synagogues. There's also the idea that it represents God who resides over the heavens above, the earth below, and the four cardinal directions, making for a total of 6. And the exact source of the name David is unclear, but perhaps it is a sign of King David, who in all his battles believed and had faith in God, and that is why he and his armies were unafraid of mortal men, of but flesh and blood, as commanded by the Torah. Okay, so these reasonings are familiar, and they sound quite nice. So there's only one slight problem. So there's a contemporary of Moshe Feinstein, who people may have heard of, called Gershom Shalom. Heard of him? Right,
The Kabbalist.
Right, he's a Kabbalist, an academic, sometimes a controversial figure. So for one of the things that are more controversial that he ever did would be or that got, maybe got a little bit of trouble, is this very nice article he wrote in 1949 about the origins of the Magen David, the Jewish star. Okay, so he's a little harsh. Okay, so as far as pointing out, the history of it. So again, here we're not going to, for the sake of time, we'll skip through this a little bit. So he points out how the origins of it being a Jewish symbol aren't entirely clear. In all the coins, everything we've uncovered in archaeology from the Second Temple, First Temple, and in between, no indication anywhere of all the graves that we found from those time periods. No indication whatsoever of anything involving a Jewish star. This of that symbol. And in fact, the first time we ever see it being used is in the 2nd, 3rd century CE. But there, it's not being used in a religious sense because it's found, adorning the walls in a non-central location right next to a swastika. As far as nobody would think that the swastika is a Jewish symbol, it's simply a very nice geometric shape. And that was all it's used for. We begin seeing it in certain graves over the centuries, but it's still not quite given this, the connection to the Star of David at all, not mentioned anywhere. So he quotes this Jacob Reifman, a scholar of the Enlightenment. Again, Enlightenment is a complicated point in history, which we will leave aside for now. So he said this, called the Shield of David, slips of a stranger in Israel's vineyard, calling the verse, they mingled themselves with the nations and learned their works. So basically, Magen David has absolutely no Jewish origins. That was the opinion of Jacob Reifman. That is something stolen from the non-Jews. But Gershom says, not quite, because as he continues, again, it's a not such a long article. Again, I linked it if you'd like to take a look at the full article later. He points out that really what became really popular in Prague, where it was the symbol of the Jews in Prague was the 6-sided star of the Magen David, and it's from there it slowly spread out to the rest of Europe and the rest of the world, becoming most popular in the 18th century. So again, skipping through towards the next part of his article. So he says, so here's his own summary at the end. The upshot of the matter is this. In the very days of its great popularity, the Shield of David was a meaningless symbol of Judaism. And the Judaism of those days, in turn, tended to be meaningless. It required more than preacher sermons, however, admirable but intent to breathe life into a symbol. The successful and empty career of the Shield of David during the 19th century is in some measure a token of the Jewish decadence of that century. So is that, again, not necessarily inspiring words, unlike what we read from Rabbi Moshe Feinstein. This is just depressing. Don't worry, he's not done making us sad. Okay, so then why on earth would anybody, so here's his version of history. Why was this chosen? Why were all the secular Zionists so proud of putting in the Jewish star? Why did they choose this at the Basel Congress in 1897? On the one hand, it's popular, it's wide diffusion in the previous century, it appears on every new synagogue, on the state share of many tribal organizations, had made it known to everybody. On the other hand, it was not explicitly identified with a religious association in the consciousness of their contemporaries. This lack became its virtue. The symbol did not arouse memories of the past. It could be filled with the hope of the future. So, Gershom Shalom's arguing that the exact opposite. There is no history behind or at least no significant history behind that anybody was aware of to the Jewish star, and that's why the secularists liked it, because they could fill in whatever they wanted onto the blank canvas that was the Jewish star. So, but again, he's not done. We'll note his conclusion, and you'll let me know if that actually, saves the Jewish star for you, or if you're still forever ruined by what he said. Okay, but even Zionism did not do so much to confer sacredness of a true symbol on the shield of David, as did that mad dictator who made it a badge of shame for millions of our people, who compelled them to wear it publicly on their clothing as a badge of exclusion and of eventual extermination. Under this sign, they moved along the road of horror and degradation, struggle and heroism. If there be such thing as a soil that grows meaning for symbols, this is it. Some have said the sign under which they went to destruction and to the gas chambers deserves to be discarded for a sign that will signify life. But it's also possible to think in the opposite fashion. The sign that in our days was sanctified by suffering and torture has won its right to be the sign that will light up the road of construction and life. The going down is a prelude to the raising up. Where it was humbled, there you will find it exalted. So what is Gershom Shalom's conclusion? Does the Star of David have any deep historical significance dating back for millennia? No. But does it have significance? Well, it was viewed as widely as a Jewish symbol in the 17th and 18th and 19th centuries, and people may have chosen it for the wrong reasons. They might have. But at the end of the day, why will it never be discarded? Because, unfortunately, the thing that made it most recognizable and interwoven is, unfortunately, the Holocaust and the atrocities perpetrated by Adolf Hitler and the Nazis. So, because of that, we will never forget what they did, and therefore we will always remember what had occurred. And therefore, that's what the symbol will always have significance, even if it didn't have. Okay, you could argue on whether or not you like Gershom Shalom's argument, or if he's even right about his research. But as far as the conclusion, I believe many of us would say that perhaps when you think of the Star of David, the two first things that pop into our minds are the flag of Israel, and then the badge that was forced to be worn by the Jews leading up to and during the Holocaust. Okay.
Can I just add the real symbol of the Jewish people is the menorah. That is the historic symbol of the Jewish people, and that's what's on the seal of the state of Israel.
Correct. We will get there, not to worry. In other weeks, we'll get to other flags and symbols of the state of Israel. Correct. So, but for whatever reason, the flag of Israel ended up being more popular than the others and other symbols. Also worthy of note,
because it's easier.
What?
It's much more simple and easier to draw than a menorah.
Correct, but we have drawings of menorahs going back over 2,000 years.
That's true.
So
it's true. But the interesting thing, if you compare it to other religions, the symbol of the cross represents something very definite. The crucifixion. The
Correct.
Symbol of Islam represents something very, very, very symbolic. This is the scimitar. There's nothing in the Star of David that is anything like that.
Correct. So part of the article of Gershom that I skipped says that the part of the rise of the popularity of the Star of David is based on the fact that Jews were trying to come up with a symbol of their own to combat the symbol of Christianity had their symbol, Islam had their symbols, the Jews wanted their own symbol, and they chose the Star of David.
Okay.
Again, whether or not, again, it had its degree of, again, clearly Rabbi Moshe Feinstein and most of us, right, me too as well, until I read Gershon Shalom's article, right, think it's very much an old, and it's a, it's an old, it's a very old, I mean, it is an old symbol, just not quite as old as we think, right? It's still definitely hundreds of years old, just not thousands. And right, so that you're so
thousands in other cultures. It's thousands of years old in other cultures.
Right, but not as a religious symbol, right? Actually behind me is a little thing of Star of Zion. But it has significance, but not quite the same degree that you thought. And so that's basically where the Star of David falls. And as far as let's say the Bar Kokhba coins, where they're all talking about rebuilding the temple, and they have a lot of Jewish imagery on the various coinage. At no point on any coin do they have a Star of David, which you would expect if it truly was a sign of the Maccabees or of Jewish sovereignty at the time. That should have been on it, the coins, but that was they had pictures of the temple and elements from the temple, as well as palm trees, and Myrrh trunculus in one, but they never had any of them that indicated anything to do with the Star of David. Okay, so again, this is a little humbling, but again, don't worry. It's Jewish. Again, Star of David is still hundreds of years old, albeit not necessarily quite as old as we initially thought. So there's another. So just like some might accuse the problem of the Star of David being that it is not quite as old or as significant as it is. So some people would say would level the same thing against the entirety of the Israeli flag. They would say that the Israeli flag, in fact, because it came from such unholy origins, it is in and of itself unholy, and we should never give it any credence. So here is this is a excerpt from my father-in-law's book, A Quest of Redemption. For more on that, the translation of for more on the book, click through the link. So in the book he quotes a question of how about arguing for the state of Israel. So in it he quotes a passage from Nefesh Harav by Rav Herschel Schachter, which is quoting we quote a lot of stories about Rav Yosef Ber Soloveitchik or Rabbi J.B. Soloveitchik of Yeshiva University. So here's one of them. This is going back, around 70 years when this story took place. So here we go. Who would like to? I didn't mean to skip the story. So this story is a little bit long, but bear with me, it's worth it. Okay, so one of the has everybody here heard of Agudat Yisrael before? Okay, so those who I see a lot of nodding heads. Some people are a little more confused. So Agudat Yisrael was a organization founded. Actually, originally were part of the Zionist Congress until they realized it was not religious, and then basically broke off, and then were very much against the state of Israel till this very day, basically. In fact, right, Rabbi Soloveitchik actually at one point had actually been part of Agudat Yisrael until they were very clearly staunch in their anti-Israel and state of Israel leading approaches, in which case he abandoned it to become the head of Mizrahi. For more on that, again, that's a separate fun story for another time. So here's what happened. This is occurring in the 1950s of Agudat Yisrael's conventions, or they like to call it the Great Assembly. So it was held in Jerusalem Hotel, whose roof was adorned with the blue and white flag of Israel. So some of the delegates felt a little uncomfortable with this because they're against the state of Israel, but they realized that it would be improper to ask the hotel to remove the flag. So finally, someone suggested that they decorate the roof with the flags of all the countries from which the people who came to participate in the convention, and so they did. Thus, the offended delegates no longer felt uncomfortable having the Israeli flag waving on their hotel, because there's the flags of America, France, England, etc. Don't worry, Canada was not mentioned, but the flag may have been there. Okay, so then what happens? So we're in Israel here. People are going to not notice this. So when the secular reporters heard about this, they immediately attacked the Aguda. One of the many points they raised was the fact that the British had been so cruel during World War II, refusing to allow Jewish refugees into Palestine, which was under their control at the time. Their flag, known as the Union Jack, flew atop their ships in the Mediterranean Sea as they sent boatloads of refugees back to Europe to certain death. And now, after the establishment of the state, the Union Jack was needed to sanction the flag of Israel. How absurd. Okay, so now we've got the Aguda representing, which is a religious group versus the secular Jew. So the religious Jews of Aguda very much against flag of Israel, and we have the secular Israeli reporters who are very much appalled and angered by what they're doing.
So when is this taking place? This assembly?
1950s. 1950s.
By the way, Canada's flag was the Union Jack at that point. We didn't have our own flag.
Oh, it still was? Okay. So unfortunately, Canada was also it's okay. I'm just in the United States. Also, their flag was used as that. Who weren't upset by the US because the US was helpful as opposed to, whatever. Anyhow. Well, that's again for another time. So now let's continue. So now, Rabbi, that very same year, right? Rav Soloveitchik spoke briefly about the Israeli flag at the Mizrachi Convention. So first, he pointed out there seems to be no eternal halacha regarding flags. All we find in the Torah is a temporary ruling that when the Israelites traveled in the desert, they encamped each man by his banner according to their father's household. Nonetheless, the Rav felt that there was a passage in the Shulchan Aruch that related to the flag of the state. Okay, this part's gonna be a little more complicated. So again, if any of the concepts here are unclear, please stop me and I'll explain more. Okay, so at the end of the Gemara of Moed Katan, the Talmud cites a Tanaitic decree that all Jews should be buried in simple shrouds, which is still the case nowadays. The Shulchan Aruch also cites this ruling that one may not bury the deceased in expensive shrouds, even if he was a leader of Israel. Elsewhere, the Shulchan Aruch, meaning Rabbi Yosef Cairo, so quotes other early commentators, Rishonim, who say that if a Jew is found murdered, he should be buried as he was found in his bloody clothes, without the simple shrouds. And then the Shach, right? You got a commentator on the Shulchan Aruch, explains the reason that if he was killed by a heathen, we bury him as he was found, in order to enkindle anger and take revenge. That is, God will see how this person was buried differently from all others, without the usual shrouds, and that will arouse his mercy and cause him, God, to avenge the murder. So now, what does this have to do with the flag of the state of Israel? So this idea applies to the flag of the state as well. Towards the end of the War of Independence, the United Nations set a specific date by which the two sides could seize territory. By that date, any piece of land captured by the Jews, verified by raising the Israeli flag on the spot, would remain under Jewish control, and any piece of land in Arab hands would remain outside the borders of the state. During that period, a great deal of Jewish blood was spilled in an attempt to raise the Israeli flag over large areas of land in order to acquire them for the fledgling Jewish state. Many fighters sacrificed their lives for no other reason than to raise the Jewish flag. Therefore, the Rav felt that the Israeli flag had, to a certain degree, the status of a murdered Jew's clothing, for it symbolized spilt Jewish blood. And when the flag flies, it arouses the divine compassion for the Jewish people. So to summarize, right, Rav Soloveitchik's opinion is, well, there is no eternal halacha regarding flags, but because so many Jews have sacrificed their lives for the flag of Israel and for the state of Israel, therefore, that in and of itself gives the flag of Israel its significance? Clear? So I find it quite interesting that Rav Soloveitchik and Gershom Shalom had very similar logics at the end, right? What made a Jewish symbol a Jewish symbol? Not necessarily a long storied past, not necessarily that we've had it for thousands of years, but what makes a Jewish symbol truly a Jewish symbol that'll last for eternity? The fact that Jews have lived and died for it, right? What makes a symbol Jewish isn't just that, oh, it's some nice symbol in Jewish history. It's that the Jews are part of that very same Jewish art and Jewish symbols. Okay, so now I'll give a brief summary and then I'll open the floor to any questions you may have about the Jewish flag, and I'll hopefully be able to answer them or point you to where it is. So, okay, so in the beginning, we mentioned that Rabbi Jacob Asquith invented the Israeli flags in 1891 in Boston. Okay, then we mentioned how David Wolfson and others knew about it and then chose to use it as a basis of the modern flag of Zion. The blue stripes represent Chelet, which in turn remind us of God above. The Magen David is an ancient Jewish symbol, but not quite as ancient as you would think. And the fact that people have lived and died for both the Magen David and the Israeli flag have given them more significance than pure history ever could. So next week, actually, we'll be pausing the shir because next week there will be a Shavuaton run by the BAYT Midrash Zichron Dov at the BAYT as well as at Shar Shemayim. We'll continue in 2 weeks with discussing the imagery of the Lion of Judah and lions in general in Jewish art and Jewish history. But thank you very much for coming. Again, if anybody wants to be added to the email list to get updates, either to send you in advance the PowerPoint or to send it to you afterwards, please feel free to put your name in the chat or email me at cmetzger@torontotorah.com. And yeah.
Shkoyach, very interesting. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
That was great. Thank you.
My pleasure. Any questions?
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi. I appreciate it. See you.